Thank you for the introduction today, and I'm glad that you've all joined us today to talk about how technology is transforming the world of work and really to explore how Guidant Global and Catalytic have come together to really make ourselves more efficient and also be able to offer new solutions to our clients. We're going to, as someone who's been in the industry for a very long time, I can remember back to when resumes were faxed over to clients, stored in filing cabinets, and everything was pretty much hard copy, paper-based. It's amazing to see what has happened in those intervening years as we've looked at now automation and natural language processing and the benefits that it brings to not only to Guidant Global, but to our clients as well. Chou's with me here today to talk about Catalytic. And Chou, did you want to take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Chou. I am the CEO and co-founder for Catalytic. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Catalytic in this, so I'll just reserve some of those comments. But prior to Catalytic, I had helped start a company called Fieldglass and had spent, the majority of my career really in the staffing industry with building Fieldglass. And so I know a lot about the industry. I love the industry. Very excited to be back in the industry with Catalytic. So we'll spend a little bit more time talking about that.
Well, before we dive in and really talk about the Catalytic and Guidant Global partnership, just a little bit about Guidant Global. We are a global workforce management solution company offering both MSP, RPO, and SOW to our clients, and really focused on helping our clients find the best talent to meet a particular situation. We currently work with our clients in over 80 different countries with a supply base of over 2,800 different suppliers, some of those being large multinational suppliers, and some perhaps being a bit more niche, focusing on a particular country.
And Catalytic is a no-code workflow automation platform that helps companies to digitize their business operations. Our goal, obviously, is to help make the work a lot faster, a lot more efficient, and because we're no-code, to do it without a lot of friction or heavy development. Our customer base is pretty varied. It runs as large as companies like Bosch, which is a multinational company with over 400,000 employees, to companies as small as 20 people. If you have business processes, if you have recurring operations, we can probably help.
All right, well, we have also included, for those of you that are interested after today's session, a couple of related content links that we'd encourage you to take a look at. And if you want to delve in a little bit deeper into some of the things that we talk about today. From a Guidant perspective, we have included the link to really talk about the 6 talent tech trends that we see in both 2021 and for the years to come, and things to consider within your non-employee workforce management.
And one of the related content that we wanted to provide is a link to a resource around some of the myths in automation. Automation's become a very common topic, and I think there's a lot of myths, a lot of confusion around it. So we put together this collection of common myths and talking a little bit about the origins of the myth and the reality of the situation. It's available here at this URL, tinyurl.com/automationRPA.
Right. So from the 6 trends that Guidant sees from a technology perspective, we're really going to focus on 2 of those today with Catalytic. One is the continued rise of automation within our industry, and as well the concept and the rise of citizen developer. And what does that really mean, and how does that bring benefits to an organization perhaps that aren't there when you think of a traditional IT developer type of concept that we perhaps are all more familiar with. So from a continued rise of automation, Chou, do you want to talk a little bit about why you founded Catalytic and where you see some of those benefits?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just unshare so that we're able to see each other a little bit more and everyone can kind of see us speaking. So when I started Catalytic, I actually didn't set out to start an automation company. Catalytic is really largely an outgrowth of my experience in helping to start Fieldglass and seeing some of the common problems that we even saw at our customers. I realized as we were going from a company where we were essentially making everything up in the early stages of a startup to a company where we really had operations. We had a lot of these business as usual type tasks that we needed to formalize, standardize these processes, and we also need to make them very efficient. I'm like a super productivity nerd, so I like to drive that same sort of thinking, that efficiency mindset into my teams. And so I did a lot of that at Fieldglass. I kept asking all of the teams, how can we get better, and how do we find metrics that monitor what we do? And a lot of it was around technology adoption. So we adopted a lot of different systems throughout all of Fieldglass. And when I left after our acquisition, I spent some time thinking about what I really wanted to do and what really spoke to me. And one of the things I kept thinking back to was how we had a lot of different platforms that to me kind of all solved the same problem. Like we were fundamentally just trying to figure out how to get people to work better together. But unlike, let's say, a project plan, this was recurring. So it was kind of the same things that we could say, we should do and benefited a lot from being very formalized. So Catalytic began with this question of how do we use completely new technology built from ground up, because I felt like a lot of the products that we were using were pretty old or they were outdated, kind of legacy products. How do we build something from ground up, purpose built for recurring business processes? Now, almost immediately out of the gate, the minute we started working with real potential customers and our pilot groups, what we realized when we looked at the processes were, a lot of these tasks that people do are just like horrible, and as engineers, we looked at these processes and we were like, wow, do you guys really do all of these tasks? Do you really send out this email? Do you really, detach this thing and then put it over into Dropbox and then, open up this?
And we do.
Right. So, we were like kind of surprised by that. So we went to one of our early prospects and we said, hey, we're focused a lot on the task and the process, but what if we gave you a concept that we're kicking around called an automated action? And what you'll do is you'll just, instead of having someone perform that task, you'll just kind of drop it into your process. So the first one could be send an email. Like we don't want you to have to manually go send an email. That's super simple for us to just automate. We'll give you an automated action called send an email. And that was like, our initial pilot customer was like, that would be amazing. We'd love that. And by the way, could you also do this? And so that's what really led us down this journey when we realized one of the greatest impacts that we can make in making a process more efficient was just by simply taking out some of those manual tasks with these automated actions. The light bulb went off and we were like, okay, this is going to be huge. And that really became a big part of our story. It's still around orchestration, but the automated actions is just such a big part of our story and such a wonderful opportunity to get a lot of efficiencies.
So one of the other concepts is a citizen developer. And I know that when I first started having the conversations with Catalytic 24 months ago, it was a new term to me. How would you describe a citizen developer and what is that in the world of Catalytic?
So, citizen developers are, it's kind of a loosely used term or loosely defined term, and it's become pretty popular in the past, let's say, year or 2 years. But the idea is just essentially a non-professional developer. If you look at most companies, they'll have developers who are paid to develop, but then there are oftentimes a lot of other people who are technical, or who are essentially working on things such as really complex spreadsheets, who we think can and who we have seen are able to raise their hand with the right technology and actually develop real solutions alongside professional developers. So, we actually have a bit of a framework that we think about internally at Catalytic of how to think about both how to use certain levels of developers as well as what the sort of skill sets they would have. So we talk about the no code builder, we talk about a low code builder, and then we talk about a developer, just a professional developer. So some people are calling it pro code builders.
Well, that's really interesting. As we started working together, one of those things that became important to us was really focusing on that 70%, right? What could we accomplish within that no code builder environment? And one of the things, as we were initially kicking off, we had to do internally was really to kind of take a few minutes, sit back and think about our organization and identify those people, as you described, those Excel hacks, those people who were the go-to person when you say, you know what, I need to kind of do this with Excel. Can you help me? Perhaps maybe they had a little bit of VBA skills, but mostly focusing on Excel. And we really found that we had some of those users embedded in every part of our business, whether it was in our supply chain management team, or perhaps it was within our billing team, or in some cases, of course, within our tech ops teams as well, where people really kind of had that skill set, but they were really stuck in an old paradigm where they were having to work only with Excel and get through vast quantities of data. And of course, when you're in Excel and you have a human in there, sometimes perhaps there's the opportunity for a cut and paste error or a mistake to happen. Not that anyone would ever intend that to happen, but it became very difficult when you were thinking about some of the volumes of data that we were working with, or perhaps even the routineness of some of the processes that we were doing, for people to perhaps make a mistake here, make a mistake there. And in some cases, it was just a function of how much work was being done, work that was necessary, but perhaps really were a good case study for automation. So we started with a process where once we had identified those people who perhaps would be a good no-code builder, putting together a training process, and we landed on really a 2-week training process. And we socialized that within and throughout our organization, and asked our managers really to get behind the people that had either self-identified or that we had identified as being someone who could perhaps be a really good no-code builder. So when we made that ask, we really focused on asking our managers to, once they'd identified that person, to commit to freeing that person up for those 2 weeks of training, to allow them to focus and really dive deep into Catalytic and its capabilities. The other thing that we asked each of our trainees to identify before starting the cohort would be to, what's one business process, perhaps two, that you or someone on your team does on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that really takes a lot of time, that you think would be a potential candidate for automation. And once the trainee had identified that, we met with the managers to review those processes, get sign off that they were behind the automation of that particular process. And then we would move into our 2-week training session. To date, we have 27 people who've completed it, and we have 9 actually who'll be finishing tomorrow. So we'll have 36 no-code certified builders within our organization. So you'll see it.
Yeah, that's really. I was going to say that. I actually sat in on. Oh, actually, yeah, you were on that. I sat in on one of those show and tells, and what I thought was really cool was how much attention you all paid to who would be a no-code builder. I thought the profile was really spot on. Like everyone was just, the exact right kind of profile. But you also built up like a internal level of enthusiasm. I'm not sure exactly what you did, but you did something where everyone who was there was very enthusiastic. They felt excited about what they were doing. They were excited about the opportunity to impact things. And then the examples that everyone showed were really cool because they were real life examples. And people felt as if they could change the way they were doing their work today, which was, I thought, really powerful.
And Sean, that's an interesting point. When we were initially kicking off the introduction of Catalytic into the organization, we really gave quite a bit of thought to how are we going to communicate this and how are we going to keep that excitement building? Because it was just one thing if you have a user go through training, they build one process, and then that's all they ever do. But we wanted to build an organization who changed the way that they thought about automation and the possibilities that were there for each of them. And as you mentioned, what's been really key to that is having the people who have done the automation, having them speak to their peers. It makes so much of a difference versus coming perhaps from a person who is sitting on an automation team and that's all that they do every day. But this is someone who maybe 95% of their job is focused on supplier adoption and supplier relationship management. And then really being able to say, this is how it makes my job better, how I'm able to save time from some of the more routine activities that I have to do, perhaps on checking up on certificates of insurance to make sure that everything is still valid and if there are any renewals that need to take place. But spending my time talking to suppliers and really building that relationship with them versus just checking in on whether or not insurance certificates are up to date. So you'll see here, we just kind of called out some of the areas that we've focused on with automation, whether it's in billing, operations, implementation. In implementation, we use a lot of data. You mentioned previous experience with Fieldglass, and the amount of data that comes into an MSP when you're implementing a new program, there is a lot of data. There's a lot of validation that needs to occur. You have to make sure that all of the relationships are there and that they are structured properly, and have found that using Catalytic to get through that data makes a huge difference in the amount of time that it takes to get that accomplished. So I was going to say, we have a couple of use cases too that we wanted to talk about as well. In this particular case, our client came to us and said, we have a couple of situations where we need to do some high volume candidate vetting in a very short period of time. It's something that happens on a yearly basis where they will seek out their candidates, go through a pretty rigorous interviewing process, and then select these successful candidates for that year. And one of the challenges that has always existed is how to get down from a vast influx of candidates down to a more manageable number very quickly, and to be able to spend their time interviewing with the qualified candidates, the people who are very interested in the position and also possess the skills that are necessary to be successful in these positions. So as you can see here, we put some indicative numbers around the funnel that comes in from a candidate perspective. So using a little bit of chat technology, estimating that we'll have about 7,500 candidates come in at the initial stage, then doing some initial screening via some particular questions that we know are important to our client. Client, of course, has contributed to the wording of some of those questions, squeezing that funnel down to about 2,500, but then using some of the skills that Catalytic has that perhaps previously have been all about a human looking at an application and reading through it and trying to do some manual scoring. It just takes a tremendous amount of time. And I don't know, Sean, if you want to talk about some of those particular capabilities that Catalytic has brought here to help us winnow that funnel down a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the cool things that I think we were able to apply here is a combination of some of the forms that we have in our platform, but forms are, I think almost commonplace. So what becomes challenging is not sending out just the forms, but the processing of the forms while maintaining a good experience. I think in the staffing world, we oftentimes talk about the candidate black hole. And that's one of the things that we definitely wanted to make sure it didn't happen. The candidates don't get a black hole. They don't feel like their submittals are going into a black hole. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're processing efficiently and that we're really appropriately applying rules, whether they're explicit rules or whether they're using machine learning to try to figure out what are the people who we need to bring down and raise the, raise the next level of this application process. So how do you hit that right balance between being incredibly efficient, being able to handle a very high volume in a cost-effective manner, providing good experience, but do it rapidly?
And that's exactly it. One of those, to providing more of an improved candidate experience, as well as a customer experience, so that what everyone in the end of the process, everyone's had a good experience, but we've been able to process through that in a much quicker manner. And like you said, with far fewer people involved in the process than previously have been involved. Pivoting a little bit, one of the other things where we have seen a lot of benefit within Guidant Global has been in our internal processes and really freeing up some of our employee internal time and talking about some of the program use cases. I talked a little bit about earlier about our trainees who, as they're coming into our 2-week session, really identifying what is a key process that I'd like to focus in on training. And here we have a business user with no previous experience to Catalytic, but really had that mindset of an Excel pro come into training and say, I spend 20 to 40 hours a week, in this case, spread across a number of people on her team, but answering supplier questions regarding aging for their invoicing. And it was a stop-start effort. It would take 2 to 3 hours to complete every single request, and we have 60 suppliers in the program. She was able, in that second week of training with Catalytic, to devise a process, including web forms for suppliers to submit their request, to be able to turn around and really change that process and that interaction to being under 5 minutes. It saved us an immense amount of time from a corrections perspective, and really allowed her and her team then to focus on other key areas of service delivery to a client, rather than spending time going through multiple different spreadsheets, combining those together, and then sending out that information to every supplier that would ask every single week, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week.
And this is also a cool story, because I think a lot of times with automation, the focus is so much on, the automation itself, that you lose sight of a really awesome story here, which is that someone's job really got transformed for the better, right? That she was able to go through this and kind of, in many ways, reinvent her job and reinvent a process in this 2-week period, which is super impressive.
And actually, that's what she's done. After completing this, and it's been now deployed for about 8 weeks, she's actually moving into a different type of role now, something where she's always wanted to move into, but hadn't been able to because she had been so tied up with some of the things that were required to support this process. So it's been really exciting for her as well.
Yeah, it's a great way to tie together both the story of citizen development and automation, where you can see that citizen development is obviously revolving around automation in this case, and then it's tying back to digital transformation, which is yet another topic that we've long talked about in the tech community. So.
Exactly. Well, I think we're running up on our time today, but I do want to thank everybody for attending today, and we'll be moving into a Q&A session. But Sean, did you have any last comments?
I'd just like to thank everyone for participating, and we're looking forward to the questions.